thank you, Simon and Kimberly. I apologize for having overstepped the time collectively, but we still have about 25 minutes for discussion, so let's hope we can have a good set of questions. Actually, it's also your opportunity, since we have the US Farm Bill under discussion, B, we have the upcoming WTO negotiations. Maybe through these experts influence a little bit of the debate through your questions as raised. Clearly, the important points or the common point raised is that the way things are working now, we would like to see a lot of change in the US Farm Bill, so it has less negative impact on developing countries, also less distortive effects on many markets. And also we'd like to see a lot of change in how this is being dealt with under the WTO rules. Now, what are the odds that this will happen? Okay, well, that would be a question. Maybe what would you think should be done, or what you'd like to know from the panelists should be done to make these changes for the better? All right, so let's take maybe 1 or 2 rounds, depending on the number of hands who would like to address the panelists, both the discussants and the presenters. When you raise a question, please introduce yourself and be very concise and precise in pointing your comment or question to one of the panelists. Gentleman over here, and then the lady over
here. Yeah, I'm Jerry Hagstrom. I published the Hagstrom Report, and I'm a columnist at National Journal. While you're having this discussion, there's a whole other set of conferences that go on in this city all the time about the need to increase agricultural production by the year 2050 in order to feed 10 billion people. A lot of what you're saying is talking about that these subsidies lead to overproduction. How do you square your concerns about these subsidies leading to overproduction with the desire to increase production, some people say by 70% by 2050?
Thank you. The first question, the lady over there.
Hi, I'm Garfilia Casamias. I'm here in lieu of John Coonrad from the Hunger Project. And I had a question specifically for Professor Smith. Now, we heard why the current situation with U.S. exports is not very beneficial to the U.S. citizen taxpayer in terms of reaping the benefits per dollar to the U.S. aid. But what would you recommend, or what would you say is a smooth way to transition from this method that we already have to a new sustainable one without derailing the developing countries that we're trying to help in the meantime?
Thank you. Go on, any other questions? Everybody agrees to what's said, or do you think nothing needs to be done? Okay, well, maybe think of a round, so let me first, may I channel the first question to Joe? You want to address the question on why we continue stimulating agricultural production through these measures while we, also whether, were we concerned with that and also concerned of overproduction, why we may still have shortage of food around the world?
No, and I think, I mean, Jerry asks a good question. I guess my response to that would be twofold. One, I say, fine, let the market decide. I don't think governments need to be in distorting production decisions to meet needs, food needs. I think the market will tell very much where those direct producers in planning decisions and other things. Secondly, I think that one thing that we didn't talk about at all in this Farm Bill debate that also has bearing on developing countries and developed countries too, and this whole issue of meeting food needs is research and development. And I think that all of us would be in, I won't speak for the others, but I believe I get the same response, is that putting a fraction of the dollars that we put into price and income support programs into research and development would have real positive gains. And instead, we've seen a decline in real spending for R&D, which I think that to me is where how to address those needs and let the market determine about what crops people are growing and other things. Thanks.
Valeria, on this same point?
Yeah, I will add one more thing to what Joe said, and I think that we have to think about this answer in terms of the global level and the country level. So we have scarce natural resources, and production should be done in the countries that are more competitive in that. And that will link to what Joe was saying in terms of investment. Some of these developing countries may have the natural resources necessary to increase their own production, but they will need new investments in R&D, in infrastructure, and in many other things that will actually help them start producing more in their own countries.
If I might add one comment, the numbers that went up there looked big because of the scale, but I think the number in terms of relative to a fixed baseline, the number was minus 0.6%. That's a drop in the bucket.
The number of what?
The number for production decline in developing countries out of the modeling effort was negative 0.6%. Did I read that correctly?
From the baseline.
And it's from a baseline that doesn't account for the overall growth long run that we expect in productivity, as long as Joe said, we re-emphasize particularly investments in agricultural productivity-oriented research, which have shrunk even more rapidly than the overall U.S. budget.
Okay. Before we get to the second question, Kimberly?
Just and a quick further response is, I don't know if it's going to be addressed in this series of papers, but I think there's a lot of previous research that a lot of the subsidies in the U.S. get capitalized into land prices, which for a lot of farmers who rent land can actually make it harder to maintain production. A lot of the landowners are actually not farmers; they're in cities, and so I think that there are lots of reasons. That's just one more on top of these others that I don't think we'd see a big drop in production necessarily.
Okay. Then, Vince, on the second question, what do you recommend we should be doing? Why is still food aid being given? Why not just send some money so people can buy their own food?
Let's rephrase the aid issue. Let's talk about expanding the capacity to deliver food where it is needed. And the fundamental issue here is that right now we're shipping food from the United States to these other countries with actually zero impact on the welfare of US farmers. For all but one very small group of farmers that raise peas and lentils. And that's changing because you all are eating more peas and lentils, not me. I hate the stuff, but that's a different issue. When my wife puts it on my plate, I gag, but then I try and put a brave face. What we're talking about here, you can quote it, Jerry, my wife would agree. What we're talking about here is shifting US policy so that the dollars available for helping people in real trouble who are in dire straits and desperately poor are used more effectively to serve their needs. In cases where the problem is within a particular region of a country, cash transfers are likely to be the most efficient way to go, providing the ability to use cash transfers. And many studies have shown that's particularly effective when the problem is, say, a particular area within a country, not overall food production within the country. Another way to go is regional sourcing. Think about South Africa, which is to some extent the base basket for much of Africa. Why not ship from South Africa into, let's say, Zimbabwe, if there's a problem in Zimbabwe, using US dollars? This is what has been done for a very long time now by countries like the United Kingdom. For once, my other country is not screwing up. We won't talk about Brexit. So there are different mechanisms that would be used that would actually, in many cases, stimulate, if anything, food production within the country. Think about cash transfers that enhance the demand within, say, Malawi for overall maize in the marketplace. That is actually a good thing, assuming that there's fundamentally enough food around within that country. So we're not talking about dumping loads of unwanted wheat onto the shores of India, which is the classic example in about 1964, which then gets burned because India they can't be distributed to where the food is needed. We're talking about much more efficient, much more effective, much more common sense, I would say market-oriented, exploiting the efficiency of markets to make $1 US provide a lot more aid where it's needed. And those numbers that I quoted earlier are pretty much consensus numbers from a wide array of studies.
And what do you expect to be the odds that your suggestions will be taken on board in the current discussion?
Well, this morning, the chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee said these were exactly the reforms that are needed. The chair of the House Foreign Affairs Committee is strongly in agreement. The Senate Agricultural Committee and its staffers fully understand the issue. The one group I have not mentioned, because it's not, I can't say, I'm not polite enough to talk about them, are the House Agricultural Committee, the staffers, and the ranking member, and perhaps, well, no, and the chair. But among a broad array of members of Congress, there is a clear understanding of the need for reform.
Thank you. Well, there's signs of hope it might...
Well, not complete misery, anyway.
Yeah, good. Joe, you wanted to comment on this point?
Yeah, I just want to say a couple things, and unfortunately, or just one thing, that it's largely because Vince ran out of time and you didn't have a chance to talk about monetization. But I think monetization is really something where, short of getting rid of in-kind food aid, I think that making serious reforms on monetization would be a big help. I mean, monetization is a very helpful thing in one sense, that the aid community has used it to finance projects. But the downside of it is those are oftentimes supplies that end up depressing prices in local markets or end up in neighboring countries depressing prices. And I think that the world would be, as you did have your pithy conclusion of get rid of it, I think that certainly that was the way a lot of the negotiations were going. And you have to understand that the U.S. is one of the few countries that remain in the world that does foreign aid or food aid by providing in kind. Most provide cash and allow local procurement and that sort of thing to boost prices locally. So.
Okay, let's see if in the meantime you've thought of some new questions. The gentleman over there.
Yeah, hi, my name is Gary Bittner with USAID, and I really appreciate the presentation. I'm not an economist or food expert, but in the presentation about cotton, it seemed like there were some adjustments, and again, as I understood it, that were kind of like a foothold in making some changes. And I think Joseph mentioned something, maybe we should do something more in research and development. So my question is, if we were to do something very strategic in research and development to further make some progressive changes, what would that research and development be on?
Okay, lady over there.
Hello, my name is Astrid Jacobs from the German Embassy. Thank you very much. A lot to digest, I think. I would like to come back to the point of Kimberly. She mentioned that there is a need to have a look into the quotas open for developing countries. To my knowledge, the Everything But Arms initiative of the European Union was a big step in that. And would you think that we can use such a model and maybe elaborate on it? Thank you.
Thank you. Raju, over here.
Thank you very much. This was a fascinating panel. I want to pick up on Valeria and Simon's points. I was intrigued by the point you made, Simon, about being behind the curveball as you get to Buenos Aires, and that is basically within a few weeks. What does that mean then for the ministerial? I mean, if you're so far behind the curveball, what will come out that will actually be, how do we catch up, or when do we catch up? And that picks up also on Valeria's point, because you mentioned the unknown position of the US. and how much does that compromise how effective the ministerial is? So just curious if you have any informal reflections on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, let's take these again on one by one. Kimberly, you want to start on the question on R&D and cotton and how that could change things around?
That was for Joe.
Yeah, okay, sorry, yeah.
At the tier.
To be patient, I think there was a more general question. So maybe you want to start there and then give it to Joe.
Okay. Well, there was on the tariff rate quotas, you're right, that the EU has everything but arms preference program, which opens the market completely to the least developed countries. So that's a group of 48, 49, depending on where we are in the phase-out process for a couple of countries, do have quota-free access to the European market. That is another area like food aid where I have been banging my head on the wall so many times I forget which is which. But trying to get the U.S. to do something similar and has not, with no success. As little success as on food aid or some of these other issues, unfortunately. There are some actually developing countries that are somewhat ahead of the U.S. in terms of providing this duty-free, quota-free access for the least developed countries. But most of them have exemptions as well for sensitive ag and textile and other products. So the EU ought to applaud them for that program, but it remains limited in terms of the number of countries it affects, as well as the EU being one of the few that is really totally open.
Thank you. Joe?
Yeah, I'll start on the R&D issue. I think Vince probably has some things to add just because he's done a lot of work in this area himself. I think the one findings about research, and that's certainly stuff done here at IFPRI and done by others in academia, is that the whole, to be effective, R&D has to be sustained, and it has to be sustained over a long period. You don't just develop something and then it's out there. It takes many years to actually develop the science, and that needs a sustained effort in terms of funding. And again, as I mentioned, really our U.S. budget, Vince, you can augment this, but we're talking about a few $1 billion a year. I mean, a fraction of what we spend in terms of crop insurance or pricing. Well, I shouldn't say a fraction. It's a big fraction, but it is far less than what we spend on crop insurance or price and income support programs, and arguably are more beneficial to farmers. Now, obviously, the benefits of research and development are diffuse worldwide, and that's a good thing too. So again, to me, that seems like a no-brainer. And in fact, most commodity groups, and if you go to the planks of most farm organizations, everyone's in favor of research and development. But I think putting that trade-off in a very narrow sense of, well, what would you rather have? I think that's where long-term, this is where public policy comes in, and I think leadership comes in and says this is where we should be putting our money rather there. But Vince, I don't know, you, again, have done a lot of work in this area.
Well, so last year we spent $3 billion on research through federally supported activity. We gave $2.6 billion to crop insurance companies and crop insurance agents to deliver crop insurance. Forget the subsidies that go to the farmers. In what world does that make sense? That's a fair question, and the evidence is that crop insurance is a product that if you have to pay for the sorts of insurance products that are currently being offered, no farmer will buy because they have a cheaper way of managing their risk. Last week I described it implicitly as the pet rock product, but that's a little harsh. Not a lot, but a little. There's an important issue. You asked the following question: where should we put our money? The answer is neither you nor I know the answer to that. Picking winners, which the British government did for years in the 50s and 60s, regardless of where it is often a very bad idea. Here's what we know about R&D. On average, it generates a substantial rate of return to society for every dollar spent on an annual basis, in the order of 40%, at least. That's what we know. We also know that we don't know which researcher will come up with the best idea. It might be the most brilliant mind at Yale, or the dumbest mind at the University of Nebraska or Idaho. We don't know who will create the next ball out type of insight. So what we need to do is fund broadly and openly without too many restrictions. Now I know USAID and the USDA love to place restrictions on how research dollars should be allocated. In general, those are huge mistakes that derive from often derive from, by the way, rent seeking by universities or states or whatever. The best way to go is to say we need to at least double the current research budget to get back on track with where we were in 1990, and not to constrain hands globally. One of the biggest concerns that we should have is that the CGIAR funding has been increasingly constrained, particularly the US donations to it. I just casually would say the CGIAR itself is somewhat to blame for that by dissipating resources across every Uncle Tom Cobley and all type of claimant for research, which seems to me to be a terrible idea, by the way. And I have no stake in that game.
We're almost running out of time, so I'm going to give Simon and Valeria a chance to quickly respond to Rajul's questions. Simon, why are we falling behind the curve? What can we do to avoid it?
So I guess my response is a two-part answer. Number one is, I mean, it's to me it's quite clear, if you, even the best of worlds, and we have a very successful ag negotiation, if you negotiate over something that's outdated and no one is applying anymore, you've won nothing. And it's just a concern that if we talk about and negotiate about price and income support, whereas the entire industry has moved on, and the support regime has moved on, then we've gained nothing. So that was my first point. My second point is with respect to MC11 and what will be achieved. I think we all can hold our breath that in terms of success anyway. I don't think it's going to be a breakthrough for various reasons. One being the current climate in the U.S., but also where the round is standing. So I don't, and I recall that Roberto Azevedo yesterday's basically said that we all have to hold our breath and wait for the next ministerial or a next event, but it's not going to be in December.
Okay, thank you. And last but not least, Valeria, what can we expect from Buenos Aires?
We'll be very brief, but yes, I think that this is my personal opinion, but I think that everybody's been a little bit disappointed because they thought that because it was going to be in Buenos Aires, which of course that agricultural is it's a big deal for countries in South America, that we were going to have some results that were important enough to actually be discussed for the agricultural sector. I think that unfortunately some other political events in the world have become this almost an expectation that is not going to happen. I think that everybody thinks that way now, and they've been working quite a lot in a work plan for the next ministerial. So they are trying to set up different scenarios and different ways of how to keep working towards some things. So every topic now is talked about in steps, what to do first and next and everything. They've been also talking about working different topics together or combined. Again, some countries are against that, some countries are in favor of, but to deal, for example, with domestic support next with public stock holdings or things like that. Something that is not even going to be covered is market access, because again, it's very complicated, but again, there's some new proposals that it will be talking about dealing with this in the future. And then I think that they are concentrating on very simple things that they think that they can accomplish, like improved notifications. Not all countries are notificating on time, so that maybe with just that it will be a huge improvement. Also to report the value of production each of the countries, so that we could also have a better idea or understanding of the levels of domestic support in each of the countries.
Okay, thank you. I was going to close with asking all the panelists what would their one-line pitch, either for U.S. congressmen and women or the trade negotiators. since we run out of time, we're not going to ask them to do that, but maybe you could think of yourself after having listened to them, what would be your pitch to try and influence the US Congress discussions and also the trade negotiations moving forward to the WTO. Given what you've heard about still large agenda out there, how to improve things, so well, I wouldn't say there's a disarray, but certainly we have still a disarray of inconsistent policies in agriculture, and that has a major impact on global markets, which, as was assessed by all the panelists, is working out negatively, particularly for a lot of people in the developing countries, although of course also beneficiaries, but what we want is to make that more equitable. So the question is, what can we expect and what should we aim to achieve in trying to influence the discussions on the US Farm Bill? It will last for another 4 years, so once we get it right, then that may have lasting impact. But of course, WTO rules, once enshrined, they also stand to at least hold up for a while, but it has been very difficult to make the right kind of changes. But hopefully this discussion has helped you a bit in terms of the thinking, and hopefully we can convey some of the messages here also to the people that influence the discussions and the negotiations more directly. So with that, let me ask you to give a big hand to the presenters and the panelists, the discussants. And thanks again, all of you, for coming out, and hopefully this was useful also to you.